Hello and welcome back to Protect Life here at Breaking the Consensus. Tonight, I'm delighted to be joined all the way from across the Atlantic by Tom McClusky, a friend of the show's, who works with Greenlight Strategy, and we're going to be talking about recent events and what may be happening in the States in the years. Before we start, I'd like to bring to your attention the subscribe button there. If you could press that any new materials that we do create, you will be brought to know about those. And the donate button is there. Anything you can give us would be greatly appreciated, even in these difficult times. I know people are struggling, but that would be really appreciated. So, Tom, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Little tired, even still recovering from the elections, but for me, that my job's just beginning.
So, were you surprised?
Um, Part of me was surprised that if I were to write a book about this past election, I would call it the gaslight election, because
Mhm.
the news and the Democrats were always like, "Don't believe what you see in front of you, believe what we're telling you." Be it that Joe Biden is competent and is a great candidate, to then that Kamala Harris is to I mean, just anything. The Democrats would try to tell you that no votes are being stolen, illegals aren't voting. The Democrats and the media would try to tell you that just isn't true, and we find out that it is. However, I had a good feeling going in, which sometimes worries me. I don't usually bet on horses because I don't usually bet right. Um, except that night, once the returns started coming in, it was pretty obvious where things were going.
It was different this time, wasn't it? I remember it's more difficult for us because we have to stay up rather late to follow. So the political junkies like myself, we were it's and last time it was very different. At the beginning, Hillary was winning, and then it was something happening, and then it was very tight, and we didn't know. This time, it felt pretty well after. It felt 2, 3 hours in, and it had been tight all the time anyway. The polls always so it wasn't going to be a surprise whatever happened.
Right. And I mean, once you see certain states going in, and there were like five battleground states, and Trump needed to win about two or three of them. He won all five. And at that point, uh, last time there was still vote counting and things like that. For some, eh, blame it on the American public education system. Counting isn't apparently our strong suit, because there's still votes counted in Pennsylvania as well as in California. But enough came in for the president this time, President Trump, that it was a significant victory. It was one where the last time they tried to say he was an illegitimate president, because he might have won the electoral college, but here, if you're familiar with our system, we have the electoral college. We also have what is the popular vote. And he is the first Republican president since, I believe, Ronald Reagan to win the popular. No, I apologize. W. Bush in 2004 won the popular vote.
I think he's the first since Reagan in '88 to win 51%. If he sticks at that,
Right.
that's
Yes.
and he's also the Democrats have uh, they control the Senate and they have held the majority in the House. So again, that's quite unusual you're going to have Republicans holding all three branches of government, all three branches of the legislature and the executive.
Right. And a message that I'm delivering to our friends in Congress, our Republican friends in Congress, is that this was a mandate election, but it was a mandate election for Donald Trump. The fact that the Republicans held on to the Senate with 53 seats, 53 right now, and that they have a slim majority in the House, is they were riding Donald Trump's coattails. And a lot of them realize it. They weren't really running on any sort of agenda like the president was. So this is Donald Trump's show right now.
So, what are the issues that are front and center for you going into this presidency? What are the things that you will be trying to place on the agenda or have concerns about?
Well, ever since uh, Roe v. Wade was overturned a couple of years ago by the Dobbs decision, and that was, of course, the judicial decision, Supreme Court decision that made abortion legal throughout the United States at all stages. That has been overturned, so now it's more or less left up to the states. There is still a federal role. Um, federal taxpayers still pay for close to $500 million a year to subsidize abortions and abortuaries and abortion supporters. So I'll be concentrating a lot on trying to defund there. It's an uphill battle because a lot of even the Republicans right now, you can't really call them a pro-life party anymore. And you might be more familiar with this in Ireland, where you also struggle to get support at times. The Republican Party is now a pro-choice party with exceptions.
Hmm.
Um, they've taken positions that are not as hardcore as they used to be. That life begins at conception. That there is no compromise when you're dealing with human life. So there's going to be a lot of convincing of them, and I think the first step is saying, okay, if you think there should be no federal role for abortion because you support abortion, taxpayers should not be paying for it.
Am I right in saying this was the first convention for some time where the pro-life position wasn't a central part of the party platform?
Since 1980. And it was I've worked on the Republican platform since about 2004. It was quite a devastating blow for those of us who worked on it. Um, but and we're working to make sure that the next platform in 2028 is, of course, pro-life. However, uh, we're going to ignore the platform kind of ignored the issue. So we're going to go forward and push what we can and make sure that there are pro-life, or at least those who are friendly to life, in key positions.
RFK, Bobby Kennedy's son, has got the job in health. Now, I think over here people know of him mostly because of his positions on things maybe about vaccines or food additives, environmentalism. But my understanding is that he has a very permissive position on abortion. So, will he have a role in health on this issue? And is that a concern for you?
Um, he's hard to define really on the life issue because you can't really say he's pro-abort. He would say he's pro-choice. He worked for a group I work for is called Catholic Vote, and they partnered with RFK Jr. even on a couple of ads, talking about his Catholic heritage and things along those lines, and why they should vote for Donald Trump this time around. He is definitely pro-abortion. He has said that for late-term abortions, he's opposed to. Um, it's and we're hoping to surround him with good people because look, I include myself in this. Americans are overweight, we're obese. A lot of it is because of what goes into our foods. I mean, when my wife and I traveled to Europe, we just by eat we can eat what we eat over here, but it's still healthier over there because the additives that the US adds. So I certainly applaud what he's doing there. Um, and on uh, some life issues like IVF. IVF right now, in vitro fertilization, is an issue that unfortunately for Catholics um, we're losing people right and left. However, with RFK, he understands that the problem, IVF just covers up the problem. The real problem is infertility. And a
Mhm.
lot of times, changing your diet, doing things along those sides, things the Catholic Church teaches, the science behind it is much better than IVF. And another issue is the abortion drug. Uh, the abortion drug, the chemical abortions, um, in talking with people around him, he has seen one, he is against putting these things in your body. I mean, you're putting a pill in your body to kill another person within your body. And he understands that is not good for anybody, especially for the woman taking the pill. In addition, once the abortion is done, the woman who takes the abortion pill is instructed, and this is horrendous to say, and I pray for the women who have gone through this. They're instructed to flush the remains of the baby into the sewer
Mhm.
systems, meaning it's entering our water. So this, in addition to being horrible for the women, this is horrible for the environment as well. So I think he will be a surprising partner on some of these issues.
So how do you see, as you said, I think people, maybe you could explain, because as you know, in Ireland, what we had before was a constitutional ban, a protection, absolute protection. And that was removed, and therefore we could legislate for abortion. I think sometimes people think that when Roe went, abortion went. But actually, if you could explain really, it was a reversion to the previous situation. What did it mean when Roe disappeared?
Well, when Roe disappeared, the language within Roe was replaced by the Dobbs decision, Dobbs versus Women's Health. And what that instructed was that it now goes back to legislatures. And by legislatures, the Supreme Court specifically did not specify. So it goes back to the state legislatures, but it also the federal legislature they see as playing a role as well. What Roe did was block, like if you wanted to pass a bill saying there needs to be parental consent for a for a child to have an abortion, Roe v. Wade would prevent that. Now states are freer to do what they want.
Mhm.
So it turned into 50 fights. However, there is still the main fight here in Washington, D.C. Said there's funding. And also those of us who are pro-life, we want to save babies in California, which is a very pro-abortion state, as much as we want to save them in Alabama.
Mhm.
So to do that, at some point, you're going to need some sort of constitutional amendment protecting those children.
But on the positive side, previously, for example, if you had heartbeat legislation, heartbeat bills, that wouldn't have been possible because of the federal nature of Roe. So now you can states can are introducing legislation, and that is happening, isn't it?
Yeah, and there are like Alabama that I mentioned, Texas. There are some states where abortion has either been eliminated or been mostly eliminated, with the exception, and this is where the federal government comes in again, is the abortion drug,
Right.
misoprostol. Um, that is, there is a law on the books that's been on the books since the 1880s here in the United States that bans the mailing of these abortion drugs. The Biden administration has refused to enforce that law. We will be asking the Trump administration to enforce that law because it's going through the U.S. Postal Service. So there's no way that state governments can really stop it.
Sure. Of course, in the election, like all elections, was fought for on many different fronts. The economy must have been a part of it for a lot of people. High inflation, high gas prices, food prices, etc. But there was also a sense, at least from the reporting we see here, that what are called the culture wars were a large part of it as well. Issues around, say, for example, things that are happening in schools, in education. This may not be something you know about, so I don't want to be unfair because obviously you can't know
I'm from
everything.
Washington,
But for
D.C. If I don't know about it, I'll pretend I do.
excellent, I'm a great believer. So, um, one of the issues that has been going on for long in schools is parental choice, and many Americans, starting here, have been opting because of the school system to go for homeschooling. So one thing that a number of Republicans have been advocating for a long time has been more school vouchers, and there has been historical opposition for the idea of any kind of government money ending up in, say, church schools. Now we know that parochial schools in the United States perform way above, in many cases, what the public school system does, and at a much lower cost. But the churches increasingly find it difficult to support them. But if there was do you think there's a chance that you might see a move towards parents being given this a voucher system, or they would get more school choice?
I think there's an excellent chance. At the, President Trump had even mentioned it at the trail at some points. It wasn't at the top tier of the issues, but it was something he paid attention to. There are a number of states right now, Arizona, Texas, I think Florida, and probably a few others that allow for because currently under the U.S. system, the money goes to the school, and then the money from your tax dollars goes to the school, and then your kid goes to the school. But what these states are doing is saying, okay, we're allotting this amount of money for your kid. you can use this to go to the public school, or you can use it to go to a Christian school, uh, a private school of your choice. And I think seeing that on the federal level, the bureaucracy on what the Biden administration has tried to do is try to stop states from doing this. I think you'll find the Trump administration much more open and allowing states to experiment in this way. If there's one department that could be eliminated, and it's even been mentioned, I believe, by those in Donald Trump's circle, it's the Department of Education. And it's not because we're anti-education, but as we all know, the best way to deal with education is closer and closer to home. You
Mhm.
don't want some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. to tell you how to educate your kid. You want to be as a parent and as in local government to be able to decide more on those cases.
Are there concerns with, say, with Catholics about the kinds of things that children are being taught? I'm not talking about reading or writing or arithmetic here, although that would be a good thing, about the kind of social stuff that's being taught to children in public schools.
It's very much has a left agenda. Um, it's in a number of schools. If your kid decides one day that if your little boy decides one day he's a girl, a number of
Hmm.
schools have policies that they do not tell the parents. There's even cases like in California where they've hidden this information. They'll have two different letters. One letter going to the parent will say what the kid's actual pronouns are, but he'll have a different school profile, a different school folder saying how he prefers to be referred to as a she or something along those lines. Totally taking the parents out of the situation. So those types of things are one reason why, because we have some great public schools here. I went to public education for most of my 8 through 12, and except the problem is that we're expecting these schools to be parents, and they're not parenting well. The things that private schools and Christian schools, what they do is more, they kind of force the parent to get more involved as much as they can. We have to understand that sometimes in this economy, both parents are working.
Yeah.
But if the parents are involved, then the ultimate responsibility falls on them.
Uh, In the last week or so before the election, President Trump made some very strong statements on the transgender ideology stuff. Do you expect to see significant pushback in that area and maybe a shift in the culture?
Um, you asked me earlier about if I was surprised. My biggest surprise was that this was such a key issue in the campaign, and we've seen it
Hmm.
in the exit polls as well. And a lot of it goes back to the parental control. Um, uh, there was an ad, the closing ad that Donald Trump did, and he mainly played it in Pennsylvania, was clips of Kamala Harris's opponent saying that she supports transgender surgeries in pills for kids as young as 5. Um,
Wow.
and it ends with Kamala Harris is for they them, Donald Trump is for you. Um, and it will play a major part. I think you already have the governor of Illinois saying he's going to be a sanctuary state for if you're a kid and you come to his state and you want transgender surgery, that they will like protect you from your parents of all things. So the federal government certainly has a role. Catholic Vote and a group called Do No Harm here in the United States, looking at insurance data, found out that, including in some Catholic hospitals, that some of these surgeries were being done on kids as young as 5, and they were
I
being paid for as young as 5, including drugs that could end up ultimately sterilize the child, and a lot of it being paid for by federal tax dollars. So one thing that some good groups have done is gone through and try to find out where that money is coming from, and the president can issue executive orders stopping that money.
so the ad you referred to, I think I saw references to. when it aired that James Carville and Bill Clinton both were speaking to the Harris camp and saying, if you don't respond to this, if you don't deal with this, this will sink you. And there was a belief that this had been one of the key messages that people had, it had really resonated. But the statement from Illinois, that seems like an incredibly tone deaf response. But do you think that that's been part of the thing that's has that surprised you that in the wake of what has turned out to be quite a significant defeat for the Democrats, that they seem to be doubling down on a lot of this culture war stuff?
There's been a mix. Governor Pritzker in Illinois, who I mentioned, of course, seems to be doubling down. There are a number of members of Congress who almost seem to be inciting riots by saying like, "We will fight back. We will go to get to the streets." But some of the more prominent names, like Gavin Newsom, who's governor of California, he's been remarkably silent. And California is one of those states that won't give the child back to the parent if they don't agree with the child's self-identified gender. And also Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's a very um, outspoken Democratic congresswoman from the state of New York. On her Twitter page, she changed her profile. It used to say she, her, like said her
Yeah,
pronouns. She changed it. She took that down. So it seems like uh, there's the Morning Joe, which is a show on MSNBC, a news program here in the United States. The two hosts are very liberal. They went down to break bread with Donald Trump. Um, However, because they did that, and as they're supposed to be journalists, so you would think um, they should always want to talk to the leader of the United States. But they're getting a lot of pushback from, including people like James Carville saying you're dead to us for even trying to reach out to Donald Trump. So it is a mix. It'll be interesting to see where it plays out. And it's one of those where I'm glad I'm sitting on the sidelines eating popcorn and not being part of that debate.
if we look forward 20 years ago, there were people in the Democratic Party saying demography is destiny. America is becoming a more diverse country. White population is declining, and this is going to mean that Republicans are going to be consigned to permanent opposition. I think for me, one of the most interesting things about this election at the level of being a geek number stuff was 54% of Latino men voted for Donald Trump, 46% of all Latinos, while 92% of black women voted for Harris. If you look at young black men, I think black men under 45, it was 30%, and 35 for black men under 30. Now, it has been observed for some time. And Donald Trump isn't the first Republican to go after, say, the Latino vote or whatever. I mean, George W. Bush was very successful also. It has been observed for a long time that if you actually look at the values of black voters, they tend to be culturally quite conservative, more so than, say, certainly white Democratic voters. And Latinos also, if you that they for them family is important, faith is important, children, marriage, these things. Do you think that there's a potentially a new alignment happening that is an opportunity for cultural conservatives in going forward to speak that to rather than looking at these as identities, but to speak to them as value groups?
I definitely think so. And I mean, the numbers that you cited, Republicans haven't seen numbers like that, I think, since like 1972 with Richard Nixon. Um, and if they're church going, it goes even higher.
Yeah,
Some of those numbers. And for the longest time, for Republicans, they thought the way to speak to the Latino community was to say we're for open borders or we're for. Except what they didn't understand was these people, a number of them are leaving regimes that are not law-abiding regimes. They're leaving countries for a better life here in the United States, and they want law and order. They did a process. Large majority of them did a process to become United States citizens or to enter this country, and they understand that with open borders, that fair shake they're trying to get will not be allowed because there's just our borders are just too porous, especially under the Biden administration. So a lot of people all across cited the illegal immigration here in the United States is a big factor, and there is a cultural aspect to that as well, where um, a lot of them coming across being law and order are also they believe marriages between one man and one woman. They believe in natural law. They believe that life begins at conception, or at the very least, that abortion is wrong. So I think with Donald Trump is more of a populist than a Republican, meaning it's like issues that are like popular, um, and that can be scary at times, um, because I have my values and sometimes they are popular. Uh, but I do think it's the populism, the understanding that life is sacred, the understanding that science is on our side when it comes to men and women and to the trans agenda. I think is how we win a lot of these voters and keep them. Keeping them will be the key thing. We can't treat them as tokens and just try to be like, this is quite honestly what Kamala Harris did with African. She realized she was losing African American men. So what she did, she said she would legalize marijuana and like give a $20,000 housing credit to African Americans, which is unconstitutional. Um,
Mhm.
and it was just such pandering that most African American men were just like, "Who are you to do something like this?"
Who do you think? I thought one interesting observation was made that the Democratic messaging towards Latino men was very much based on the idea of identity, ethnicity, but that Republican messaging was towards Latinos was almost the same as the messaging they used for working class white people. So, and that seemed to resonate. I suppose what I'm wondering is, as you say, the question is holding on to and to be sensitive to these people, these groups, their needs. That when you break the monolith, you create the possibility. When you're the only guy in the room who votes Republican, it's very hard. But when you suddenly realize, oh, we have permission. It's okay. It's a thing we can be. And Thomas Sowell used to say for years, you don't have to get 50% of the black vote. You just have to get it under 85%. And the Democratic coalition is just in deep, deep trouble. And once you break that sense of hegemony, that people don't see it as part of their identity, but that these people are actually speaking to my needs, and that creates a long-term problem or possibility.
In the U.S. Congress, until recently, the few Democrats, they've been run out of the National Party, the few Democrats that would vote pro-life and would vote pro-family were either your African American or your, for the most part, there were a few exceptions, or the only pro-life Democrat still left in Congress is um, is Hispanic. And when you go into the states, you see a lot more pro-life Democrats, and it's usually among the minorities.
So the we talked about the is there any other area, shall we say, in these culture wars that you think we may be seeing a change in? I mean, um, the I think this the schools issue obviously is a big thing, and the trans the sort of the transmission of the transgender stuff. We talked about the school. Is there going to be a change? He's been talking also about changes in the relationship with the universities and funding the universities, and also because there's been an issue which seems very strange for the United States about free speech in these places because the United States famously has very strong speech protections. It's the land of the home of the land of the free, and yet there's been a sense that a lot of people are getting cancelled, shut out, excluded at the universities, and the universities are where everything starts. But he's been talking about uh, changing the funding if people don't sort of shall we say, match up to American values.
It's and it'll be the Department of Education is one he has not yet nominated anybody yet. I have heard Ben Carson might be in the running, who would certainly, I think, push things in that direction. Federal university right now, college is way too expensive in the United States, and and that's why people are taking loans. Except for a lot of these premier colleges like Harvard and Princeton and Stanford, they have endowments that are huge, within billions of dollars, and some of those are in tax shelters that I think that the federal government can threaten to take away if these universities don't start teaching more instead of indoctrinating.
Hmm.
One other, just on education as well, that I didn't mention before, a surprise from Donald Trump towards the end also was he mentioned about homeschooling tax credits for parents who homeschool. Um, he had never mentioned that before. That'll be another thing that Catholic vote and that I'll be pushing for, is to include that in any packages or for the presidents who do.
It maybe seems a little bit early to start talking about this, but we're only a few weeks after President Trump's election. But J.D. Vance, after some people felt a shaky start, uh, has come out of this election. We get the sense with an elevated uh, reputation, and people are saying now he's positioned, shall we say, to be the obvious successor. How do you think Vance's status is now?
I'm a little biased. I was able to meet him when he was right before he ran for the Senate. Um, I think he is extremely well educated. He also is not afraid to push back. It was JD Vance when he would get. Um, I mean, Donald Trump, of course, pushes back on the media, except he does it in the Donald Trump style that only he could get away with. It's very brusque. It's almost like a boxer. Um, when JD Vance pushes back against the media, it's almost like he's a dancer. He puts it back on them, and you're already seeing, like, Mike Johnson, who's current Speaker of the House of Representatives. A lot of other politicians are pushing back against the media, not letting the media drive the agenda when they're being interviewed. And I personally think JD has a lot of leadership qualities. I think he's going to play a big role in the Trump administration, and I personally think that he is set up to run in 2028.
I've heard a few people and some friends of mine over there say that was it oh, I can't remember, Nance. Somebody said the vice president ain't worth a pitcher of warm spit, was the famous quote. But that there's a sense that JD Vance is going to be one of the most uh, potentially one of the most policy engaged vice presidents we've seen for a very long time. That he is going to be part of this administration.
Right. And recently, the whole bucket of warm spit thing, I think that was said like end of the 19th century, maybe the beginning of 20th. It's changed a little bit. I mean, Al Gore, who was Bill Clinton's VP, was
Hmm.
very much involved. Uh, Dick Cheney, of course, was very much involved. George W. Bush, can't say I was thrilled about that one. Joe Biden supposedly was very involved with the Barack Obama's administration. Kamala Harris, they said she was involved, except everything she was in charge of kind of fell apart.
Right.
Um, but I do think even after all that, that JD will be the most advanced. His one of his key staffers today was just named to head up Donald Trump's legislative liaison office, meaning he will be the point person going up to Capitol Hill pushing the president's agenda. Um, and that's a guy named James Braid. So he if JD Vance's people, a lot of them in his DC staff, if they're getting administration jobs, we're in safe hands.
Eh, If you look back on this campaign, and it's always dangerous to make big assessments about things soon afterwards. A little bit of time and distance is maybe a valuable thing. I had a professor who once observed that anything that was written after 1603 was journalism, not history. But I think that may be a bit extreme. But do you get a sense that this election was the election when the what you could call the mainstream media or the legacy media ceased to be the most important part of the media landscape, that something fundamental changed?
I definitely think so. I mean, just even on election night, and you mentioned how you're a political junkie and with the numbers. I don't know about you, but I was checking Twitter or now X
Mm.
and other media sources before I was checking the main reason I would turn on the television to watch the news was to see if any of them were crying. I wasn't looking for any numbers or anything like that from them. So I think there has been a dramatic shift. Uh, Most of the MSNBC, CNN, most of the news channels here in the United States, their numbers are just continuously dropping. I don't see that changing. There are other options out there, even televised in the United States now. There's EWTN that has its own news program, and there are just so many right now. Even Catholic Vote is about to start their own kind of media outlet type thing. Um, so there are so many sources out there that the landscape has changed, and the media has. When you look at the polls about the least respected industries in the United States, Congress is usually pretty low, but always at the bottom is journalism and the media. They just have proven they can't be trusted.
This is not unique to the United States. In the confidence surveys that are done over here, um, scoring out of 10, politicians get 3.7 and journalists get 3.8. They are the bottom of the pile. I think this is the nature of the beast. So before I let you go, I'm aware of your time. I'm assuming that you must be feeling a more optimistic person now than you would have been 4 years ago. So if you're going to look at if there are a couple of things that you would like to see achieved, or you hope you might see movement on in this presidency, what do you think are the areas you're most likely to see positive movement?
Um, I think right now, for the pro-life movement in the United States, we're at a crossroads. We're still trying to understand what the landscape is, not now that um, there's more freedom there's more freedom to pass pro-life laws, just as there's more freedom to be more pro-abortion. Um, and looking at Donald Trump's doing, especially I described it to some friends of mine, like in the first Trump administration, when he nominated people to different positions within his government, he picked people, very good people, Jeff Sessions for Attorney General, Tom Price for HHS Secretary, Betsy DeVos for Education Secretary, except
Hmm.
there were also people who were acceptable to the mainstream, to the establishment here in DC. And what happened was they either became part of the swamp or they got beaten by the swamp. The swamp is the bureaucracy here in
Hmm.
the United States, in Washington, D.C. This time around, it seems that Donald Trump is nominating people that he just wants people who don't really care what their next job is. I really think he wants to be transformative. And I've been trying to encourage the pro-life movement here. We have to think big. The two things that I'm going to try to do is there is a possible way through the administration to fund the abortion industry here in the United States. That would take, as I said, $500 million a year away from the abortion industry, which would, I think, be transformative. And also, obscurely, in 1973, when Roe v. Wade, the court case was decided, a bureaucrat at the Internal Revenue Service, the tax service here in the United States, changed the regulations, declaring that abortion was health care. You and I both know
Wow.
abortion is not health care. When a life is being taken away, it's not health care. Um, what the Trump administration can do is change the IRS code back, and this would change a lot of it. it would also stop the taxpayer funding in a number of states, let alone on the federal level, since it will no longer be seen as healthcare because it is not. Um, I think we need to start thinking big, um, and also we should take advantage of the opportunity when it comes to the trans stuff, especially protecting the children, which is a very popular issue.
Well, it turns out that people get annoyed when you come for their children. Who knew?
I know, and the Democrats keep on trying.
Listen,
They're like the
Tom,
party with the white van and candy.
Tom, it's been great to talk to you. I hope we'll be talking to you again sometime soon when you have time. It's always great to talk to you. But for
I'm
tonight, I'd
always
like to
glad.
thank Tom McClusky from Greenlight Strategy, and I'd like to thank you for joining us. If you can press the donate button, anything you can give will be used to the best of our ability to defend those life values that we all share. Thank you, and thank you, Tom.